role of the vice president is a spare tire, have it wrong because they probably are looking at other jurisdictions. In our jurisdiction, there are very specific roles that the vice president is entitled or is empowered by law to perform. But I think that one of the more interesting things about that role also is the fact that still a lot depends on the trust that exists between the president and the vice president, because the president does delegate several of his roles, and he can delegate those roles depending, of course, on how on the kind of trust that exists between both parties. So many times also that role is one where a good degree of trust is required between the two players, namely the president and the vice president. Where that trust exists, I think there is plenty of room for activity for the vice president. There's plenty that the vice president can do. And finally, I think that the role of the vice president, is one which also requires, I think a great deal of patience, because you may not always agree. You may not always agree with policy. You may not always agree with all the various aspects of what is being done. You may not always agree.
Thank you very much.
Well, I assure you that won't be the case, because like it's clearly stated, the vice president have a role, and the role of the vice president, to me, is most critical role, because we're talking about the economy of this country. The main problem of this country today is its economy. Economy is on the knees. And because it's not working, it's not creating jobs, it's not doing anything, the vice president is in charge of rigging this economy and rebuilding it to where you can create jobs, to where you can be able to ensure that there's financing in various areas of our government. The vice president is in charge of, for example, debt management. Today we have virtually at a level where our debt is unsustainable, because we are using over 50% of our revenues to service debt.
Ahead the 2019 general election, Nigerian vice presidential candidate held the first TV debate on Friday night, 14 December 2018. The feud between the vice president Yemi Osinbanjo and vice presidential candidate of the opposition party Peter Obi. Peter Obi faulted Buhari's anti-corruption effort as tantamount to leaving the shop and chasing the thieves. Osinbanjo, however, refuted the analogy, asking Peter Obi if anything will be left in the shop if criminals are allowed to loot the entire inventory. Fighting corruption is not an economic policy. It is not that you can't fight corruption, but you can fight it more aggressively while addressing economic issues. For example, in 2015, unemployment and underemployment was 24%. Today it's 40%. In 2015, we attracted $21 billion in foreign direct investment. We attracted only 17 last year. We attracted only 12 last year. That means it's going to, our GDP was 520 in 2015. Our per capita was 2,500. Today it's under 1,900. If you look at our stock market, it's lost over 2 trillion in 1 year. So that is not any policy. You're not creating jobs, you're not doing the right thing, and you're just fighting corruption. You can't shut down your shop and be chasing criminals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That if you allow criminals to steal all the inventory in the shop, there will be no shop. That's the problem.
Please.
And what has happened to Nigeria in the past 16 years is what the World Bank told us, that the major cause of our poverty is corruption. That's a major cause. That's what we've been told. So let me say that there is no way that we can minimize what has happened. We can't minimize corruption. If you minimize it, we run the risk of completely, in fact, the argument is lost. We cannot do what we want to do.
The two speakers also disagree on whether Nigeria has improved its ambience to attract foreign investors. While Peter Obi outlined statistics about the volume of foreign investors in other economies, Osinbanjo, punctured by the fact that the countries Peter Obi cited, such as South Africa and China, have one thing in common, which is adequate infrastructure.
Sector to drive the economy. So that investment needs to triple, because it's even low compared with that's why your size of your economy is very shallow. So for us, and that is why it's not creating jobs. That's why you have the level of unemployment you have today. So if you're talking about how to drive up the investment, if you look at everything that's been done, is that you need to look at the overall economy, regig it properly, where the private sector would drive the economy, there will be more investment. A lot will happen. Your banks today, all the loans they're giving is about 15% of your GDP. When other countries are doing 50, 100%, China alone is doing 250% of their GDP as credits to businesses, to private sector. And you can see why you have better investment in other nations than Nigeria.
The common denominator of the countries you've mentioned, both China and South Africa, is strong infrastructure. Our country, over the past 16 years, has suffered a major infrastructure deficit. So we don't have rail, we don't have roads, power. When we came into office in 2015, power was at 4,000 megahertz. That is 16 years, in 16 years. So you need strong infrastructure. And nobody can make excuses about that. You've got to have strong infrastructure, which is one of the major focuses of our administration's policies, in putting in place the right infrastructure. The second thing is that you cannot have a thriving economy if you allow the type of grand corruption that has taken place in Nigeria in the past 16 years. I've heard one of the candidates say that fighting corruption is not an economic policy. With all due respect, if you don't have resources, if you don't have money, if the resources have been stolen, then you cannot possibly even generate jobs. You can't even build infrastructure. In the past 3 years, the government of President Muhammadu Buhari has spent 2.7 trillion on capital in Nigeria. That is the highest ever in the history of Nigeria, despite earning 60% less than the previous government. We have currently spent 2.7 trillion in 2 budget cycles, and we're earning 60% less. When oil was at $100 to $114 a barrel.
According to Osinbanjo, the All Progressive Congress government is investing heavily on road and rail transportation, blaming Nigeria's infrastructure deficit from 1999 to 2015 on the People's Democratic Party's administration. Osinbanjo and Peter B were the stars of the night while speaking. They occasionally attracted cheers from the planted crowd in the audience at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel in Abuja. Osinbanjo said corruption is the major cause of the country's current challenge, which must be tackled head-on, adding that the country's economy has consistently in the last 6 quarters has been going up under the current administration, which is focused on building the country's infrastructure, especially on road and rail transportation.
Of this country and the entrepreneurial spirit of the average Nigerian, we would have been able to build facilities, manufacturing facilities that would drive export, not just within Africa. African trade today is less than 9%. And if we get it right, it can go as high as 30% or 40%. The foreign exchange you're saying today you're not earning from oil. Oil line gives you 80% of your foreign exchange, when in effect, if you do the right things, you can have twice that coming from manufacturing. Other countries that don't have anything to do with oil are driving their foreign exchange earning all from manufacturing. So you have to look at the agreement, look at those things we're not doing well here, put them in place, and sign that agreement, because it's going to be a win-win for us. It's just that the manufacturer said, let's look at this. Let's know what is there for us. There's no way you can be part of packaging something and it gets to the stage of signing, you walk out of it. So what were you doing when you were part of packaging?
Type of grand corruption that has taken place in Nigeria in the past 16 years. I've heard one of the candidates say that fighting corruption is not an economic policy. With all due respect, if you don't have resources, if you don't have money, if the resources have been stolen, then you cannot possibly even generate jobs. You can't even build infrastructure. In the past 3 years, the government of President Muhammadu Buhari has spent 2.7 trillion on capital in Nigeria. That is the highest ever in the history of Nigeria, despite earning 60% less than the previous government. We have currently spent 2.7 trillion in 2 budget cycles, and we're earning 60% less. When oil was at $100 to $114 a barrel. no infrastructure was built. Today, oil is at sub 60. When we came into office, it was $28, going on to $30. Yet, we spent more on capital and on infrastructure. The second thing is that you must have poverty if you don't have a social investment scheme. I've heard some mention already about countries like India, like Mexico, like Brazil. These are countries that had a social investment policy. And that's the sort of thing we have also.
Osinbanjo said the administration's social investment program were put in place to address poverty in the country. Meanwhile, the People's Democratic Party vice presidential candidate said his party's main agenda is to create jobs, which he believes remain the key to addressing insecurity and other antisocial vices in the country. Meanwhile, reacting to the debate, the Director of Strategic Communication, Buhari campaign Festus Keyamo, blasted Obi for citing achievements of China and other great nations during the debate. According to Keyamo, China did not achieve greatness in 3 years, but spent great number of years in planning them. Keyamo also said that while these great countries were putting their houses in order, the People's Democratic Party were busy destroying Nigerians' future.
There's a critical role in falling out with the president. If you're doing the right thing, you can't fall out with anybody. I can assure you of that. If you continue to do the right thing, because the vice president who chose you for a reason. He knows that you have something to deliver. So you're not there. You're there to be loyal to him and serve Nigeria faithfully. So I don't see where there's a problem. I can tell you I've never had any issue with anybody in government, and it won't start with this, because we will together start making Nigeria work again.
Thank you very much.